And hello, everybody. Welcome to a special edition of the Racing Angle. And I'm your host as always. But this week I'm joined by a very special guest. I'm talking about NHRA Pro Stock Motorcycle drag racer Jianna Evaristo. Gianna, thanks for joining the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh man, it is such a pleasure to have you. Let's get started. How did that love of drag racing come about for you? Obviously, you grew up with your father Mike and your sister, of course. But how did that love really develop for you?
Yeah. So it's always funny. I always start by telling people, like, a lot of people say, like, oh, we were born into racing. And obviously, of course, I grew up in it. But I was honestly like almost like born into cars and bikes themselves. There's a big car show that always happens the week of my birthday in August in California. And my mom actually went into labor with me while my dad was on stage getting an award for his car. So I always like to start and say, like, no, I was really born for this, So I always like to say that. But no, I mean, most of my memories from my childhood, revolve around racing. It was definitely more something we just got to do every couple weekends. We'd go to Sacramento or Bakersfield and we just, have the time of our lives. My dad raced nostalgia dragsters and we'd spend our weekends out there. And so, the love for racing has always been there. We went every summer to Sonoma Raceway to watch, the big dogs race. And, we'd spend all weekend out there racing, watching them race. So the love for racing was just always there and it continued to grow and grow, obviously into my adulthood life.
And then you talk about Sonoma Raceway, talk about some of those memories, and then what's it like, here, in a couple of weeks, you're going to go back to Sonoma Raceway as a rider. Obviously, you've done that before. What's those emotions like every time you go back?
Oh, it's really crazy. And like still to this day, like before, in the mornings on race weekend, I'll go and I'll just sit in the stands and I'll kind of really just take it in like before anybody gets there. And, I'll just tell myself like, this is crazy to stop and think about how far I've come. I went from being one of the fans, waiting to get to the stand, getting the food, you go running up to the stanchion, seeing the drivers, getting their autographs, getting their hero cards. And now, I'm racing alongside some of the people that I got, hero cards from when I was a kid. And now to be able to race alongside of them at my home track that I grew up going to, not even thinking that I would ever be on the same track as them and now being able to go do that every year. It's a very crazy thing to be able to experience. And, sometimes I forget about how, crazy of an experience it really is. And so I always like to take those moments and just, take a step back and, realize like, look at how far you've come, and I hope that, I'm out there inspiring, some people as well, who are there watching us race, in Sonoma. And eventually, years from now, they're going to have the same story that I have and be like, I came to Sonoma when I was a kid and I watched you race and now I get to race alongside you. And, that's hopefully something that, a message that I can get to people.
How hard is that during the grind of a season? How hard is it to kind of stop and smell the flowers, so to speak? How do you kind of remind yourself to be grateful during, because again, the season is such an incredible grind.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely difficult. Not so much difficult in the sense of like being grateful, but I think it's very difficult to acknowledge the wins, like the small wins. I think you ask every racer and they'll tell you, like, even if they make the perfect run, they'll still tell you what they did wrong on the run. There's always something that we can change. And that was something I really had to work on very early on in my career, especially because I was learning at such a fast rate and constantly making different changes. I went from different bikes, different platforms, different teams. And, so I always felt like, well, I'm racing with people that have, 20, 30 years of experience compared to myself. And so I really had to force myself to be like, okay, like every single day, every time you get on that bike, I want you to pick 3 positive things that you've done, good or bad. Even if the run was terrible, I still want you to pick 3 positive things. That way I'm forcing myself to be like, okay, like, am I where I want to be? No, but am I still making progress? Yes. And that's really important. And that's kind of helped me as a rider become more successful.
Was Pro Stock Motorcycle always the goal for you? Was that always the long-term plan? Did you ever have interest in the other categories, or was it always you wanted to ride?
Yes and no. So I've always loved motorcycles, always loved Pro Stock Motorcycle. But we always had a really big rule in our house growing up was don't look at a motorcycle, don't touch a motorcycle. Like it's just never going to happen. I actually didn't even touch a motorcycle till I was 19, which is very rare for a lot of people that, obviously race motorcycles. It's more of, yes, it was an end goal, but it was more of a goal that I never thought would be achieved. I always assumed, okay, well, my dad races cars, my sister races cars. Naturally, I'm going to go, that route as well. But I was lucky enough to get that opportunity and have parents that were extremely supportive. And I shot my shot and I was like, hey, I think I want to race pro stock motorcycle. And they were like, okay, and I was like, oh my gosh, they actually said yes, and I'm very lucky that they were there to support that decision. So
Do you remember a moment or a time where all of a sudden that kind of unattainable goal felt like it was starting to become real, and what was going through your head and just those emotions?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, most people know that I've followed my racing career that it was a pretty rocky start. I'll be the first to admit I thought it was going to be a lot easier, and the riders out here, we make it look very easy, but pro stock motorcycle is a very difficult class to not just, those bikes aren't easy to ride, let alone ride well. And, everybody makes it look very easy. So honestly, I genuinely never felt like I was successful in the class, maybe until maybe like 3-4 years ago. I felt like there was a lot of things that I had to prove to myself before I could truly call myself a competitive, pro stock motorcycle racer.
Do you remember when it kind of started? Was there a moment where it just started to click for you and go, yeah, I'm starting to finally figure this out?
Yeah, definitely. I'd probably say around 2023, actually. And, I owe a lot of my success to my current team, that's MSR. And, when I made the switch to that team, I pretty much had to relearn how to ride completely. And then, I think everybody saw right away how successful I started to become in, that was my last year. I was on a Suzuki. But it was like my first full year really racing with MSR. And so I was learning a lot of new things all at once. And it was a very hectic year. But I'd say about halfway through the season, I really started, getting competitive. I was cutting good lights. I was on a good bike. And I really was one with the motorcycle. And then from there, I'd really just say, 23, 24, 25. 25 was a little bit more of a rough year because it was kind of a learning year. We ended up changing the fuel. So, we had some things to learn. So last year, I would say was a really rough year for, I think just the motorcycles in general. But, I'd really say like 2023 was a year where things really started to, I'd say, pick up for me in the terms of I was really comfortable on the bike. I was confident. I knew I was a threat. Other people thought I was a threat. And that's really when I'd say I start to feel successful.
You mentioned 2025 being a rough year or a learning curve year. How do you feel about 2026 in comparison to 2025 so far?
Oh, I definitely feel like I'm way better off. And I always say too that it's, at least for me as a rider, it's very difficult for me to I guess have the confidence as a rider if I feel that, my bike is struggling. And, there was a lot of times last year where either the bike was on it or I was on it, and it was very hard to get those to match up. And I feel like drag racing is one of those sports where the vehicle can be there, but the rider or, the racer, they have to be there also. And like all the stars have to align, to make like that perfect run. And I just always felt like last year we were just really missing that. And I really feel like this year we really kind of got, back on schedule where, my bike's running really good. I'm running really good. I really struggled with my lights in 2024 and 2025. And, I lost a lot of rounds in 2024 when, and I lost a lot of races too, which there was a few races where I should have won. And I truly believe that I had one of the fastest bikes and, that was on me. I threw it away. I just wasn't there with my lights and I lost on a lot of hole shots. So that was something I was really focusing on was, getting my lights better. And, we really worked on that 2025 and during the off season. And, I really feel a lot more confident in my riding now. And, I think that I'm going to be much better off this year.
And there's a lot of people that say that drag racing is mostly a tuning sport. There's a lot of perception about that, but you just talked about how you have to be on point as well. How important is the rider or the driver in these circumstances? Because some have that, I think, a little misconstrued.
Yeah, and I feel like our class specifically is so much more rider racer focused than any other class. You know, obviously because we're on a motorcycle where we don't have the seat belts, we don't have the parachutes, you know, our motorcycles are so sensitive. And I always like to give people the example when I had switched to the V twin. I was really struggling with when I'd leave the line, my bike was, kept darting right or left. And we were really struggling. I just couldn't figure it out. And we just kept doing testing. And then we pretty much realized, Matt just watched a bunch of videos and he said, I want you to take your right foot and move it in 2 inches on the pegs. And I was like, okay, like I never knew that had my foot, out there, because when we ran the Suzuki, the Megaphone, like that's where my foot would be further out. So I just rode it further. Instant fix. And I was like, you're telling me that this is all I had to do? Like, it was so stressful because I was like, this is really that's all it took to fix. And it's something so small like that, whether we're leaving with our shoulder up, our elbow too far, like all of those things affect us as riders and racers that you won't really see in other classes because, obviously they have the seatbelts, they're in a cockpit. But for us, we're taking so much force when we leave, where what it takes to be able to leave with the motorcycle and not upset it to where, we have that great 60 foot, we're still shifting, we're shifting 5 times while going down the track, at full throttle. And there's so many different things that, we have to deal with crosswind, headwind, tailwind that nobody else really feels except for us. So there's a lot more pressure on us to be perfect every single time.
And then, what kind of a mentor has Matt Smith been to you? What's your relationship like with him? Obviously, he's your crew chief, your tuner. What's your interactions like with him during a race weekend?
Oh, they're great. I'm very lucky to have had the opportunity to work with not just Matt, but Angie Smith as well. And they have really just the knowledge that they have put together is just amazing. And I like to say that they're like my parents out here, and they say that they think of me as their daughter. And that's always the running joke with them is they're like, yeah, she's our daughter. She's just cooked a little extra, and I'm like, yeah, but I actually spend when we have races back to back, I spend majority of the season out living with them in North Carolina. So yes, it's a working relationship, but they really are truly like family to me. And, it's a very great dynamic to have both Matt and Angie, because there's a lot of things that Angie experiences as a woman, and going through racing that, Matt hasn't experienced or, really can't help, me with. And that's, if I can't get that answer from Matt, I can get that answer from Angie. So I'm very lucky to be able to have that dynamic. And it's just the amount of knowledge and skill that they both bring to the table as, I owe a lot of my success within the past couple of years to them. And I feel like it truly shows on the racetrack.
And of course, Angie just had an incredible weekend, getting her 200th win for women in NHRA. Obviously, it was an emotional weekend with Matt having to go to the hospital for a couple of days there. What was all that like to watch from your standpoint? You just talked about how special Angie especially is to you. What was that moment like for you?
It was a very crazy weekend. And we were so close to having a full MSR final, full all ladies final, which Angie and I have joked that we have been trying to do that for years. And we were so close, but I was, it'll happen. But I am so proud of the way my team just came together. And I always say this is why I chose this team, because I think everybody is able to acknowledge when everyone's running good, yeah, that's a championship team, but nobody really sees it behind the scenes of when things are struggling, what it truly means to be a championship team and what everybody has to do to, get through those hardships together. And this team is just truly amazing. Everybody plays such a huge role, and there's honestly was not a single doubt in my mind that we weren't going to run successful. And, we've talked about it a few times where, Angie was like, I truly didn't think that I could do it without Matt. And I was like, I knew you could do it. I knew that all of you could do it. I didn't really it wasn't a question in my mind of like, oh, are we not going to run? Because that was the big question, was whether or not we were going to run. And in my mind, I was like, well, why aren't we going to run? Like you guys have the knowledge and the skill to do it, So I'm just I have the utmost respect for everybody on my team, and I feel like we really showed what it means to be a championship team this weekend. And yeah, very crazy weekend. I'm very proud of the success that we've all had. But we all agreed and we said, Matt, you're not allowed to take any more weekends off. Like, that's it. Like, we're not doing it again. So just, get better because we need you at the racetrack. So.
And then what you talked about when you chose MSR, what was that process like, and what made you go with them?
Yeah. So we were actually looking at a few different teams at the time. And Matt and Angie love to tell this story that, when I found out that I was working with them, I actually cried, and I started crying because I didn't want to work with them. I was really young. I had heard a lot of negative things about them as a team. And, I didn't know any better. All I'd ever heard was that, no, they do this, they do that. They're not nice people. And honestly, I hadn't had many conversations with them, because if you get to know Matt and Angie, you know that they are 100% business. So they don't really go out of their way to talk to anybody at the racetrack. And, I assumed, I was like, well, they don't like me. Like, well, now they're going to work with me. Like, I was scared. And I will always be the first one to admit that I was 100% wrong about who they were. And that, I learned very fast that all the people that were talking negative about them were just, it was coming from a lot of jealousy. They show up every race weekend. From the moment we leave the shop, they are on kill, just they have their schedule from the moment we're at the race weekend. The moment we get back, they're just always on kill, and because this is their livelihood, this is their life. There's a reason that they have so many championships as a team. And I always say that I'm very happy that the way things worked out. Obviously it was the right decision for me to go with this team. We obviously work very well together. So I always say, like, yes, I was sad at first, but once I obviously got to know them, I was like, I don't know why everyone's saying all these negative things about you guys. So I'm always a very big promoter, because I still to this day will hear people saying like, oh, they're this or that, or you see a lot of things on social media too. And it's like, people don't really get the full picture of them. And I'm like, you guys have no idea who they truly are as people. So it's just, a lot of haters out there, unfortunately.
There are, in fact, a lot of haters in anything you do. Being a woman in motorsports, I got to ask, how do you balance that? How do you balance and deal with kind of the negative chatter? Because obviously, being a woman in motorsports, a lot comes with that. Not to say it doesn't happen to men too, but it does. But it feels like it's a little bit harsher on the women a lot of the time.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting too, because I feel like drag racing is such a unique sport where just like there's already naturally a lot of women in drag racing, so it's not very like uncommon to see us racing, and it's not uncommon to see us, kicking butt out here. But like you said, I'm not going to say that those comments don't ever happen, because they do, And I think as when I first started racing, I had a really hard time with it, because, I started racing when I was 21. I started the process when I was 19, and my first professional year, I was 21. So I really say that, I grew up my early, most of my 20s, I've grown up out here. And that was something I really had to learn how to deal with, was, a lot of negative comments, but at the same time, with those negative comments, you have so many good comments. You have so many people that come up to you, men, I've had men and women, and it's always amazing. Like, I'll have older men that are in their 50s, 60s come up to me and say, you are my hero. Like, I want to be like you when I grow up. And, really seeing the impact that, my journey has had on people is really what keeps, like the negativity out of my head. Cause I'm just like, everyone's going to have an opinion. And, I always say, like, I was lucky enough in the sense to where I did a lot of embarrassing things racing very early on in my career. So, I was kind of able to get that out of my system, because I was like, well, I don't really care if I mess up now, on TV. Like, there was way worse, back in 2019 or, 2021. So to me, I kind of just brush it off. And, Angie has really helped me also kind of learn how to work, and, deal with that negative comments, especially, a lot that woman will get. And, I'm very lucky to have her as a mentor, and, my sister as well. Obviously, Jasmine gets a lot of, interesting comments as well. So, I'd like to say that, we're never going to experience that, but unfortunately, I think that's just life. But I truly feel, the more women that we have out here, the stronger we are, and the stronger we are together. So I think the more we keep kicking people's butts, hopefully it shuts people up.
You mentioned your sister Jasmine. What's it been like to share this journey with her? That had to have it has to have been so special.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's been really cool. And like we always say how the dynamic has shifted too. Cause when I first started racing, all I know is pro stock motorcycle. I've only raced professionally out here. And, Jasmine went from A fuel to then making that transition to, a professional class. So, it was almost like I got to be the guinea pig to a certain extent, like I got to get a lot of hate very early on, or, like experience, I guess the pro class with, the cameras in your face, the fans, this and that. And she was able to kind of help me navigate through that. And, she was able to learn from, the things that I had to experience and then take it to her professional career, in Top Fuel. But it's been really amazing. I honestly say, like, I don't think I could race out here by myself. And, that, especially when our father stopped racing, that was a really big one for us because, we were always a family, it was always the three of us out there. And then when he stopped and it was just us two, like we didn't care how busy we were, like we would do everything we could to be up there for each other's runs. If we couldn't be there, we'd text each other like, I'm sorry, I can't be there. Like she would send people to come give me a hug for her. And they'd be like, I'm giving you a hug from Jasmine. I'm like, okay, like cool, awesome, but just the support that we have for each other, because this sport is so difficult, physically and emotionally, we go from highs or lows, and I can't imagine doing it without a support system like having my sister there.
And then take me through when you're getting ready for a run. What's the mental preparation like when you're getting ready to head to the starting line? What's going through your mind mentally?
Yeah. The big thing for me is I make mental runs. So what I'll do is I'll go through and I'll think about all the runs I've made, and I'll find the perfect, in my mind, what I consider the perfect run. And I will play that run from the moment I put my helmet on, exactly what I did, where my feet were, where my hands were, what it felt like, what the stand sounded like, what I was hearing. I'll go through the gears. I'll go to my back seat and I'll just make that run again and again and again. I like to, very much like Angie, and this is actually, I've learned a lot of things from Angie. And one of the big things that she had me learn was put your helmet on early, close your visor, block everything out, and just go through the perfect runs in your head. And so you'll see her, and I do it myself as well, like we'll have our heads down, and that that is our moment, and I just make runs again and again and again and again, because like I said, the sport is very mental. So if you're thinking negative things of like everything you shouldn't do, you're probably going to do those things on that run. So I do my best to think positively, make those positive runs, and do everything I can to pretend as if I'm in that moment again, making that perfect run.
And then when you're making that run, that 200-mile-an-hour pass, what is that like for those of us that have never been on a motorcycle? What's that experience? What's it like for you mentally, physically, all of it?
It's a very, I guess, difficult feeling to explain, just because there's like, if you have no reference to it. But I always like to say, like, your smoothest runs you ever make are going to be your fastest runs. If you go out there and you're hanging off the bike and you're shifting through the gears and you're doing all these things and you're like, wow, that was really fast. Like those are usually like your slowest runs because you're fighting the bike. And, I always use the example of Sonoma 2024 when I went 667 at 204. If I went back and rewatched my GoPro video, I watched the videos again, from the track. I barely move, like at all. Like everything was smooth. I moved up, let the clutch out, like just, went through the gears, like my shoulders stayed, square. And so I always say the smoothest runs are your fastest runs. For me personally, I think what I find so addicting about drag racing is it's one of the very few moments where everything goes silent for me in my head. I have a lot constantly going on in my head, and drag racing is one of the very few things that I've found where the moment I let the clutch out, it's just like pure silence. Like everything. It's just like it's one of the very few moments where I'm truly there. And I'm not sure if that's like a thing for everybody, but for
Mhm.
me, that's why I love it so much, is because it's just 100%, like I'm 100% focused. It's me with my motorcycle, just doing my thing, just truly being present.
And I think that's just incredible. But of all the tracks that you race, besides say Sonoma, obviously you're going to have you're going to be partial to that one. But what's your favorite track on the schedule besides Sonoma?
Ooh, that's a hard one because obviously with some new tracks,
Mhm.
we've had a lot of success. So obviously, they're a lot of fun. But I always have a special place, I guess, for Charlotte, because that's the place where I made my first ever run on a pro stock motorcycle. Um, so I'm always, very particular to that one. I really love it. I also really loved Reading as well, because that was where had my first 200-mile-per-hour run. So that was a really special race for me. Um, you know, we go to so many great tracks where we get to meet so many great fans, and the facilities are nice. But it's really hard to say something other than Sonoma's my favorite. And I always used to everybody be like, oh well, that's just your home track. But now it's like, oh well, like I ran my personal best ET. But I guess
Mhm.
now, after this past weekend at MRI, like I technically ran my best personal speed there, so I'd have to say, like this is a pretty great track. So yeah, I don't know, they might be tied now. So
Well, you led me to my next question. I appreciate you doing the work for me. You did have that best at Maryland, and so when you realized that, when you got the numbers back, what went through your head? What was that run like?
So I actually didn't think I ran what I ran, mainly because I had to ride the bike. And like I said, it was one of those moments where I was like, man, I had to hang off the bike. I had to correct, I knew I was off the throttle a little bit in some areas. And by off the throttle, I mean going from, 100% to, like 90%. So, we're talking very small numbers. But, as a rider, you're like, oh gosh, like you knew you could be better. So when I had pulled around and they told me I ran that, I was like, are we sure? Like, are we sure? Like, this is my run? Like, are we sure? I was like, I'm not mad about it, but like, okay, cool. And, I was like, wow, this is really amazing because, when I had actually ran the speed in 2024, Matt had made the joke. He's like, okay, like, like that's enough, like you're not going to take, my my 205 away from me, my record. And, I told him, I was like, I want to make that my mission to take your record from you. I was like, and you should be proud of that. And he's like, oh, I would be proud of it. And, we went back and looked at the data and we saw where, I could have been better. And he's like, yeah, he's like, you probably could have taken that from me. And he's like, and I was like, well, I knew you were in the hospital, like I didn't want to do that to you. You've had a rough weekend. And he's like, well, thank you. But no, it was truly amazing. And I say like I really needed this weekend and for a lot of different reasons, just because honestly I had really been struggling after 2025, and I'd been struggling the first couple of races mentally, just really not feeling like I was there as a racer, and just once again either the bike was on or I was on, and just we just really weren't meshing yet. And I was having a really hard time. So to really get that break this weekend, that break that I just really needed to kind of get my confidence back and be like, yeah, this is fun, like I'm out here for this. It was something I really needed, so I'm very happy about it.
How do you fight through those mental lows, those low moments? What keeps you going during kind of that quote unquote dark time?
It's really, really hard. And a lot of racers are better at it than others. And, I've always been very upfront with my emotions. And,
Mhm.
I've always said, I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not. I'm always emotional. I always have been. I wear my heart on my sleeve. Like I will cry like at the track, at home, the trailer. Like my team knows that I'm the emotional one on the team.
Mhm.
And so that's where, for me personally, I rely on my team a lot. And, they know exactly, if I'm down, they know exactly what to say. Um, you know, we have a lot of conversations where we'll debrief or talk about like, okay, like, like, how are you feeling? Like, what is it we need to get you, to get back to, where you were in 2024, where, you were just letting the clutch go. You had no care in the world. And, I'm very open about talking about my feelings with them about, like, yeah, today I'm just really not feeling it, like I'm just really struggling today. And they're like, okay, like, let's figure out what we need to do to get you, to where you can, make a good run. So I say that, I really depend on my team a lot. And I think it was something new for them because they're all not like super emotional. And so when I started working with them, I was like, guys, I cry a lot. So you guys are going to have to be used to that, and they've been just really great with it. So I'm very lucky.
How important is that mental health aspect for you in terms of being kind of mentally in the place to make a run?
Oh, it's extremely important. Especially because of how dangerous our sport is. And we always say, like, if there is a doubt in your mind about, what you're doing, you should not be getting on that motorcycle. Obviously, I'm not going to say it's the most dangerous class because, there's obviously classes that go faster than us, things like that. But it is obviously one of the more dangerous classes because we don't have seatbelts, because we don't have the roll cage, things like that. And with that comes a lot of respect for the bike. I always say, like, there's times where I'm just like, I hate my motorcycle. I'm like, this stupid thing. But then I'm like, I'm sorry, but I love you. And it's just like, please don't hurt me, But, we really have to respect the machine. And, with that, just, making sure that you are confident in what you're doing. Remembering why you're there is very important because the moment you have a doubt in your ability or whether or not you can ride or do that, that's when you really get into trouble.
And then you mentioned that first pass on a pro stock motorcycle at Charlotte. I have to ask, what was that like? Do you remember those emotions? And then how did you kind of attack that? It being so dangerous, like you mentioned, there is no roll cage, there is no protection, no seat belts. You just kind of get on and go. How did you mentally get past that hurdle?
Oh, it was really difficult, especially because I didn't come from a motorcycle racing background. I mean, the only other bike I had rode was my Sportster on the street, and completely different motorcycles. So I didn't really know what to expect. And I think, like with anything, that is the biggest scariest thing is just like the fear of the unknown. And I just remember, like, I was shaking. I was just like, oh my gosh, okay, and for me, I just, I almost got into this mindset of like, okay, like, you want to do this. And I remember my dad telling me like, what do you have to lose? He's like, you can go up there and you can suck, you can go up there and you can do really great, but you're gonna know, and you're only gonna know if you do it. And I remember being like, man, he's right, like, don't let him know that, but he's right, like, I'm not gonna know until I actually do it. I think I had it on the two-step, and the bike that I was on, I was able to, I wasn't able to do like a full launch right away. So I was more of like a street bike to where I could like put it on the throttle, then slowly let the clutch out and just kind of drive off the line. And even to do that, I was a little scared. But I just remember, like, once I actually let the clutch out and like kind of took off, I was like, and then I was like, oh, this is fun. I was like, I like this. I was like, wow. And it was honestly in that moment, I knew, I was like, I was meant for this. Like this class I was meant for. I was like, I don't have any desire for anything else. And just that is really when like the fire in me really like kicked up, because I was like, I need more. I need to get better. I need to, do everything I can so that I can race this motorcycle well.
And then a couple of fun ones before we wrap up. You kind of mentioned this already, but who do you most want to face in a final round head to head? Is it Angie Smith?
I mean, I think that would be great just because, she's such an important mentor to me. And I think it'd be so great to see, two amazing women like face off against each other, and especially be from our own team. I mean, honestly, like, I love, we always say like you're gonna have to race everybody at one point. And like there is really no easy pick at all. And I know myself because I was the underdog for a lot of years. I was the one that everybody doubted, and I could go up there and cut people's heads off randomly. So I have a lot of respect for every single racer, especially because I know how difficult it is to be able to race these motorcycles successfully. So honestly, I would love to race everybody. I think everybody has the capability to make it into the finals and, be successful. So I don't that's such a hard question. I always like to say like Angie or Matt. Matt, I really do enjoy racing Matt just because, it's Matt Smith and I have raced him a few times. Obviously, Pomona 2019 when he was running for a championship, and to this day like we still joke about it. He's like, I don't have that other championship because of you, and I'm like, no, that's on you. Like I sucked at riding, so really that was on you. But yeah, anybody I'd say from my team I would love to race. That way it could just for sure be like an all team final.
And then what's something fans might be surprised to learn about you?
um I'm actually a pretty big scaredy cat. Like I'm very scared of a lot of things. I have a lot of people be like, "Oh, you're an adrenaline junkie," and I'm like, like to a certain extent. Like, ma'am, I'm afraid of the dark. Like I sleep with a nightlight. Like I'm afraid of the ocean. I'm afraid of heights. Like racing is really like the only thing that I do that's like crazy adrenaline junkie. Everything else, I'm like, no, no, no. Like I like my order. I like my life. Comfortable and safe, and racing and riding motorcycles on the street are really like the only two where I'm just like, super crazy stuff. But yeah, I wouldn't say that I live like a crazy, super, adrenaline junkie life away from the racetrack. I'm pretty normal.
And Pro Stock Motorcycle is off this weekend. So what is it's rare during the season to have an off week. What is an off week look like for you? How do you spend that time to recharge?
Yeah. So I'm actually on the road with my team. So I'm in North Carolina. Actually Matt just actually got his surgery today to get his gallbladder taken out. So we've kind of been taking care of him, but he looks like he's doing really well. So he'll have another procedure tomorrow, to finalize some things. But I think really we're just gonna finish working on the bikes, hang out a little bit. The sun's supposed to be nice, so it's supposed to be nice and warm, so it'll get me ready for Bristol because I think it's supposed to be pretty hot when we go there. So I got to acclimate to the heat and to the humidity because it's been a minute since I've been in humidity. So but yeah, just really try to mentally, I guess, calm down a little bit and refocus before we head to the next race in Bristol.
Yeah, Bristol will be warm, and I got a feeling, being an Ohio guy, that Norwalk will be quite humid
Yeah,
as well.
definitely.
Uh, I just a couple more questions. If you weren't a racer, what do you think you'd be doing?
Um, Honestly, I'd probably be doing so. Like I actually work full time still. A lot of people think that my job is racing, which it is. But I actually work for our family business in San Jose, California, which is Valley Services. So I always make the joke I'd be cleaning toilets because that's what I do when I'm at home. I work in HR and I do onboarding, and we do a lot of events where we have our portable toilets out, and I clean those on the weekends. And like I said, definitely not glamorous, but it pays the bills, and I'm very proud of what my family does. So I'd if I ever stepped away from racing, I'd probably be working full time. As my family says, you get to go away and have fun on the weekends, and we don't. So I'd be at home working.
And then finally, when you look ahead, say 5 years from now, where do you want your career to be? What success do you want to have had? Where do you want to be?
I definitely like some more wins. It's been way too long since I've won, and I've been close a lot of times, and I feel really good about this year. I would obviously, like everyone says, championships as well. I'd love a championship. But if anything, I always say that my big goal when I came out here was to inspire people. And I know it kind of sounds corny, but honestly, like just knowing how much I struggled when I first came out here, I would really love to see other people have that same opportunity and, be able to get the inspiration from my journey and be able to use that for their own life. I always say that I want to be able to inspire people because there's people that inspire me to be out here racing and to kind of push through all the hardships that I had out here, all the failures, everything, and to keep going. And, I use that, and I've kind of based my whole life and my personality around that. And, I really hope that I don't got to inspire a bunch of people, but I hope I inspire one person. If, one person can tell me that, I've inspired them to, whether it's start racing, whether it's to start a new journey in their life, like to me, that is the most important thing. So I hopefully within the next 5 years, I can inspire some more people,
Well, you no doubt are doing that, and we hope to have you on after wins and championships over the next 5 years. We'll cross our fingers too for you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And just thank you so much. And before we let go, is there anything you want to say, promote, talk about? You have the floor.
No, I mean, I'm very lucky to be out here. Hopefully, we can get a bunch of fans to come out to Bristol. And if you can't watch us in person, watch us on NHRA TV. I just want to thank my sponsors, Denso, Valley Services, JHG, Pleasanton Ready Mix. I'm very lucky to have you guys backing me. And hopefully I can, like you said, get a couple wins and a championship. So thank you.
Well, we're certainly rooting for you, and we're wishing the best to you for the rest of the season and beyond. Thank you so much for coming on, Gianna. I hope you enjoyed it.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure speaking with you.